This is what the science actually says when you eat the 50 foods most often sold to you as superfoods, and just as importantly, what it doesn't say. For the next half hour, you're getting the real research behind each one. The studies, the numbers, and the honest limits of what any single food can do for a body over 40. Let's begin with something most videos will quietly skip over. Superfood is a marketing word, nothing more. And no official definition for it exists at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or the European Food Safety Authority. It was never a scientific category, it was built to sell things. Here's where it started. Back in 1917, the United Fruit Company, the business you now know as Chiquita, printed a booklet called The Food Value of the Banana, pitching the fruit as cheap, nourishing, and easy on the stomach. The label caught on after doctors reported treating celiac disease and diabetes with banana diets, and the American Medical Association went so far as to recommend bananas for children, all of it happening before anyone understood the role gluten plays in celiac disease. The very first superfood, in other words, was a banana with a marketing department behind it. That history sets up how you should watch everything that follows, which is with your eyes open. These foods are good for you, and the science underneath them is real. What you won't find is a single miracle food carrying the biggest results, because the strongest findings in nutrition come from patterns of eating stretched across years. Keep that in your back pocket, and the rest of this falls into place. Section 1. What the strongest evidence actually shows. Before we touch a single ingredient, you need to know where the most reliable evidence points, because it decides how much weight everything else deserves. The first landmark carries the name Predimed, a Spanish trial. Researchers tracked 7,447 people at high cardiovascular risk and sorted them at random into 3 diets: a Mediterranean diet built around extra virgin olive oil, a Mediterranean diet with roughly 30 grams of mixed nuts a day, and a lower-fat control diet. They halted the study after a median of just under 5 years because the picture had already come into focus, and both Mediterranean groups landed at roughly 30% fewer major cardiovascular events. This first appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2013, and I'll be straight with you about what happened next, because the study was pulled over a flaw in how people had been randomized, then republished in 2018 once it was corrected. The conclusions survived intact. Next comes the MIND diet, which Dr. Martha Claire Morris and her colleagues at Rush University Medical Center developed in 2015. Picture a blend of the Mediterranean and DASH diets that leans hard into leafy greens and berries. Across a study of 923 older adults followed for about 4.5 years, the closest adherents cut their rate of Alzheimer's disease by 53%, and even the moderate followers came in 35% lower. People eating 6 or more servings of leafy greens a week showed brains that were aging like they belonged to someone 11 years younger. Then there's the Blue Zones research from Dan Buettner, a National Geographic Fellow who built on the work of demographers Gianni Pes and Michel Poulain. 5 places surfaced where people live unusually long lives: Okinawa in Japan, Sardinia in Italy, Nicoya in Costa Rica, Ikaria in Greece, and Loma Linda in California. Whatever else set them apart, their plates shared one thing: whole foods, mostly plants. Fiber closes out this opening group. A review commissioned by the World Health Organization gathered 185 prospective studies and 58 trials, roughly 135 million person-years of data, and landed in The Lancet in 2019. Between the highest fiber eaters and the lowest, the gap ran 15 to 30% in all-cause and cardiovascular mortality, and the sweet spot sat around 25 to 29 grams of fiber a day. Hold those 4 findings in mind, because now we go food by food. Section 2. The berries and fruits. We'll open with berries, since this is one corner where a whole category actually earns its reputation. Blueberries lead. 1 cup delivers about 3.6 grams of fiber alongside anthocyanins, the pigments that paint them that deep color. In the Annals of Neurology in 2012, drawing on the Nurses' Health Study, the heaviest berry eaters pushed back cognitive aging by as much as 2.5 years, in research led by Elizabeth DeVore at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Strawberries carry vitamin C and flavonoids, and they sat inside that same berry and cognition work. Raspberries add fiber along with compounds called elagitannins. Acai arrives with a warning attached. This was the berry that became the face of antioxidant marketing, which is exactly why the Federal Trade Commission moved against fraudulent acai weight loss claims between 2010 and 2013. A Tufts antioxidant researcher named Jeffrey Blumberg dismissed those weight loss promises as pure hype, and both Oprah Winfrey and Rachel Ray filed sworn statements denying they'd ever endorsed the products. The berry genuinely holds antioxidants, but the promises bolted onto it were the trouble. Goji berries bring antioxidants and got swept into European novel food scrutiny back in 2007. Pomegranate holds panacalogens, though I'll level with you, there's no reliable standardized amount per serving I can quote. Now the everyday fruits, which get less credit than they've earned. Oranges and the rest of the citrus family hand you vitamin C and flavonones. Apples bring fiber and quercetin. Bananas, the original superfood, remember, carry about 422 milligrams of potassium plus vitamin B6, and watermelon rounds things out with lycopene, an amino acid called citrulline, and a whole lot of water. Berries and fruit give you fiber, vitamin C, and plant compounds tied to slower cognitive aging, and that's a verified foundation to build on. Which brings us to the greens. Section 3, the leafy greens and cruciferous vegetables. If one detail from the Mind diet sticks with you, make it leafy greens, so let's give them a proper look. Kale runs dense with vitamin K, a single cup of the raw stuff clearing well over 450% of the daily value, and it throws in 80 to 90% of your daily vitamin C on top. Spinach is the other vitamin K heavyweight, with half a cup cooked delivering about 444 micrograms, which lands close to 370% of the daily value. The cruciferous vegetables come next, and broccoli heads the pack. 1 cup of it raw hands you about 81 milligrams of vitamin C, meaning 90% of the daily value, plus about 92 micrograms of vitamin K, and it carries a compound called glucoraphanin, the precursor to sulforaphane. That opens onto one of the stranger facts in this whole video, which is broccoli sprouts. 3-day-old broccoli sprouts pack 10 to 100 times the glucoraphanin of the mature vegetable, a finding from researchers Fahey and Talalay published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 1997. Brussels sprouts bring glucosinolates together with vitamin K and vitamin C. Cabbage offers glucosinolates and vitamin C of its own, and cauliflower steps in as another cruciferous pick, rich in vitamin C. Leafy greens hold the strongest single food link to slower cognitive decline we've got, while the cruciferous crowd stacks on plant compounds and vitamins C and K. From the garden, we head to the sea. Section 4, Fish and Omega-3s. For anyone past 40 with the heart on their mind, this section carries some of the most direct evidence in the video. Salmon takes top billing as a leading source of the omega-3 fatty acids EPA and DHA. Farmed Atlantic salmon carries roughly 1,910 milligrams per 100 grams, wild salmon about 1,410, and the American Heart Association wants 2 servings of fatty fish on your plate each week. Sardines are quietly astonishing. A 100-gram serving hands over about 382 milligrams of calcium, around 38% of the daily value, riding alongside about 9 micrograms of vitamin B12, which comes to 372% of the daily value, and a solid dose of omega-3s. Mackerel is another oily fish loaded with EPA and DHA, sitting right there on that same American Heart Association list. Here's the number that pulls it together. Published in the Journal of the American Heart Association in 2022, an analysis of 71 trials found that about 3 grams a day of EPA and DHA dropped systolic blood pressure by roughly 4.5 millimeters of mercury in people already dealing with high blood pressure. Fatty fish gives you omega-3s with a measurable effect on blood pressure and a clear instruction from the American Heart Association to eat it twice a week. From here, we move to the foods doing similar work through healthy fats grown on land. Section 5, Nuts, Seeds, and Healthy Fats. This group holds some of the most striking mortality numbers in all of nutrition research, so keep an ear on the sources. Start with nuts as a whole. A New England Journal of Medicine study in 2013, led by Ying Bao and Charles Fuchs, followed more than 76,000 women and 42,000 men across 30 years, and the people eating nuts 7 or more times a week posted a 20% lower death rate, with the effect climbing as intake climbed. A separate meta-analysis in BMC Medicine in 2016, covering 20 studies, found that every 28 grams of nuts a day knocked all-cause mortality down by 22% and cardiovascular disease risk by 21%. Now the individual names. Almonds in a single ounce deliver about 7.3 milligrams of vitamin E, roughly half your daily value, plus about 76 milligrams of magnesium. Walnuts supply the plant omega-3 called ALA, about 2.5 grams per ounce. Chia seeds carry about 10 grams of fiber and 5 grams of ALA per ounce, and they contain all 9 essential amino acids. Ground flaxseed gives about 6.4 grams of ALA per ounce and stands as the richest dietary source of lignans, while pumpkin seeds bring about 150 milligrams of magnesium per ounce, around 37% of the daily value, along with zinc. 2 more anchored the Predimed trial itself. Avocado, at half a medium fruit, holds about 487 milligrams of potassium, edging out a banana, plus fiber and monounsaturated fat. Extra virgin olive oil, thick with monounsaturated fat and polyphenols, was the fat sitting at the center of that Mediterranean result of roughly 30% fewer cardiovascular events. Nuts, seeds, and healthy oils carry some of the strongest longevity links we have, running up to a 20% lower death rate for steady nut eaters. That takes us to the grains and legumes. Section 6. Whole grains and legumes. Here's where fiber does much of its heavy lifting, and where a small daily habit turns up in the data. Oats carry a soluble fiber called beta-glucan, and the Food and Drug Administration signed off on a health claim for it clear back in January 1997, that 3 grams a day trims total cholesterol by about 5% and LDL cholesterol by about 7%. Quinoa counts as a complete protein, with 1 cooked cup handing you about 8 grams of protein and 5 grams of fiber. Legumes bring a finding worth sitting with. In the Asia-Pacific Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2004, eating 20 grams of legumes a day was tied to a 7 to 8% lower mortality, and beans make good on that. Lentils are a strong case in point, since half a cup cooked delivers about 9 grams of protein, 8 grams of fiber, and a heavy load of folate, while edamame and soy supply complete plant protein and isoflavones. Whole grains and legumes carry the fiber that the World Health Organization review linked to 15 to 30% lower mortality, and even small daily amounts of legumes show up plainly in the numbers. Next up, fermented foods and the gut. Section 7. Fermented foods and the gut. This is one of the newer frontiers in the research, and it produced a clean, clear result. At Stanford, a randomized trial put 36 healthy adults through 10 weeks, and the diet rich in fermented foods widened the diversity of the gut microbiome while lowering inflammatory markers. And here's the twist: a high-fiber diet didn't produce that same jump in diversity in this particular study. The whole thing ran in the journal Cell in 2021. So the fermented foods earn their spot. Greek yogurt delivers roughly 17 to 25 grams of protein per cup, depending on the type, carried along with probiotics. Kefir is a fermented milk drink loaded with probiotics of its own, and kimchi and sauerkraut are the fermented vegetables that line up directly with the Stanford findings. Fermented foods connect to a more diverse gut microbiome and lower inflammation inside a controlled trial. That leads to a set of foods that work through single strong nutrients or plant compounds. Section 8. The roots, the reds, and the rest. Each of these foods brings something specific worth carrying home. Sweet potato stands out for vitamin A, since 1 medium root delivers about 122% of the daily value, all of it coming from beta-carotene. Beets supply dietary nitrates, and a 2024 meta-analysis found beetroot juice lowered systolic blood pressure by about 5.3 millimeters of mercury, though I'll flag that the nitrate content swings widely. Tomatoes carry lycopene, roughly 2.6 milligrams per 100 grams raw and more once you cook them, so that figure keeps moving. Eggs deserve their moment here. 1 large egg gives 6 grams of protein, about 147 milligrams of choline, roughly 27% of the daily value, plus lutein and zeaxanthin working for your eyes. Mushrooms hand over vitamin D once they've caught some UV light, together with selenium and a compound called ergothioneine, and seaweed and nori, both Okinawan staples, deliver iodine and minerals. Then the aromatics and the drinks. Garlic holds allicin, which forms the moment you crush it, and a 2019 meta-analysis found garlic drops systolic blood pressure by about 8.3 millimeters and diastolic by about 5.5 in people with hypertension. Ginger supplies gingerols, known for calming nausea and inflammation. Cinnamon carries polyphenols with a modest effect on blood sugar, and honey brings antioxidants along with antimicrobial properties when it's raw. Now the caffeinated bunch. Green tea holds catechins, and a Japanese study called the Osaki study, tracking more than 40,000 adults and published in JAMA in 2006, found that among women drinking 5 or more cups a day, cardiovascular mortality risk ran noticeably lower. Matcha is that same green tea in concentrated form. Coffee brings its own weight, since a 2019 meta-analysis in the European Journal of Epidemiology, built on 40 studies and nearly 4 million people, pinned the lowest all-cause mortality risk at about 3.5 cups a day. 2 of them call for the most caution. Dark chocolate and cacao carry flavanols, and a large trial named Cosmos, with over 21,000 adults published in 2022, found cocoa extract cardiovascular death by 27%. But that was a secondary result, and the trial's main goal of reducing total cardiovascular events never reached statistical significance. Red wine, and Sardinian Cannonau specifically, carries resveratrol, yet the benefits of resveratrol stay largely unproven in humans at the amounts you'd actually pull from a glass. That wraps the foods. But 2 subjects I promise to be honest about change how you should read everything you just heard. Section 9. The turmeric catch and the ORAC story. Turmeric first. Its active compound is curcumin, about 3% of turmeric by weight, and you've almost certainly heard that black pepper turbocharges how much of it you absorb. That claim traces to a 1998 study by Shoba and colleagues, reporting that piperine, the compound in black pepper, lifted curcumin's bioavailability by 2,000%. Let me be precise about this, because it was a single small human study, and no one has independently replicated it since. The advice to pair turmeric with black pepper is everywhere you look, yet the famous number holding it up rests on that one study. Now the larger story, the one about how foods got ranked for antioxidants in the first place. A scoring system called ORAC, short for Oxygen Radical Absorbance Capacity, came out of scientists at the National Institute on Aging and the USDA in the early 1990s. The USDA published databases ranking foods by their ORAC scores. Berries and cocoa and spices and legumes all scored high, and marketers fell in love. May 16, 2012, is the date it fell apart, because that's when the USDA pulled the ORAC database entirely. Their reasoning was blunt, that the values held no relevance to how specific compounds actually affect human health, and that food and supplement companies were routinely misusing ORAC numbers to sell their products. A longtime USDA researcher named Dr. Ronald Pryor admitted the misuse himself, granting that in too many cases the goal had simply been chasing the highest antioxidant figure. So the next time a food gets sold to you on its antioxidant score, remember that the very agency that invented that score threw it in the bin, which walks us straight into the most important warning in this entire video. Section 10. The warning. Food is not a supplement. Every good thing you heard today came out of whole foods, and that distinction is anything but small, because here's where it turns into a matter of life and death. Consider a Finnish study known as ATBC, which followed 29,133 male smokers. The men handed beta-carotene supplements, and beta-carotene is the exact compound that turns sweet potatoes and carrots orange, ended up with an 18% higher rate of lung cancer and an 8% higher total mortality. A second trial, CARROT, tested beta-carotene in smokers and asbestos workers and got shut down early for the same grim reason: more lung cancer and more death. Then in JAMA in 2007, a large analysis led by Bielakovich pooled 47 well-designed trials covering more than 180,000 people, and the verdict on antioxidant supplements taken as pills was that they significantly raised mortality, with beta-carotene, vitamin A, and vitamin E each pushing the risk upward. By 2022, the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force tied beta-carotene supplements to about a 20% higher lung cancer risk and came out against taking beta-carotene or vitamin E to prevent heart disease or cancer. Read those results slowly. Beta-carotene inside a sweet potato connects to good health, while beta-carotene inside a pill raise the odds of dying, the same compound landing on opposite outcomes. That is the single most important lesson in the whole science of superfoods, that the benefit lives inside the whole food, eaten as part of a whole diet, and not inside some extracted, concentrated version sold to you in a bottle. Conclusion. So what actually happens to your body when you eat these 50 foods? Eat them steadily, as part of a whole food, mostly plant pattern. And the evidence turns genuinely encouraging, not because any single one of them is magic, but because of what patterns like these deliver over years. The Mediterranean pattern in Predimed brought roughly 30% fewer cardiovascular events. The Mind diet, built on leafy greens and berries, tied to a 53% lower rate of Alzheimer's among its closest followers. Steady nut eaters saw up to a 20% lower death rate, and high-fiber eaters landed 15 to 30% lower on mortality. Those are the real numbers, and they outweigh any single superfood claim ever made. Come back now to where we started. Superfood, the word itself, was invented in 1917 to move bananas, and no official definition for it exists anywhere to this day. The foods on this list never needed the label anyway, because blueberries, salmon, leafy greens, nuts, beans, olive oil, and fermented foods were good for you long before a marketing department handed them a title, and they'll go right on being good for you no matter what anyone decides to call them. The honest version turns out to be the more useful one. No miracle hides in any single bite, and the results come from what you do most days, stretched across many years. Eat the real foods, in real variety, and let the pattern carry the weight, because that is what actually happens to your body, and it beats any hype you've ever been sold.